and welcome to Festival of Place Social Impact. My name is Christine Murray, and let me welcome you back to this event where we're unpicking the ways in which we can make a meaningful and material difference to the lives of people through the design, development, and delivery of places. Each of our 8 sessions across these 2 days takes a deep dive into how to deliver a positive social impact. And now we are turning to sharing some of our case studies and insights from LDA Design's approach. And I really hope that you'll leave this event with the inspiration and knowledge you need to make better and more impactful decisions. A reminder that all of these sessions are recorded and available to stream live or playback via the schedule button on the top right. And we'll be taking questions from you, the audience. You can put your questions into the Q&A tab at any time during the talk into the chat panel to the right of the screen. And please feel free to use the chat for your comments, the Q&A tab for your questions, and our emoji button to share your reactions. The speaker slides and other links can be found in the resources tab. So we rely on our sponsors and organization members to keep these events accessible and our journalism barrier free. So thank you to LDA Design, our proud supporters of this event. And thank you to our organization members for their continued support. In this session, we are exploring infrastructure and social equity through an in-depth case study into a flood resilience project, which ended up delivering so much more, from heritage to placemaking, place-based to promenade. It's my pleasure to welcome 2 speakers who are going to tell you more about this really unique project that we've covered actually in our most recent issue of The Developer. So Sophie Thompson is a landscape architect and head of public realm at LDA Design with over 20 years experience in the design and delivery of great places, streets, and open spaces. She is passionate about a people-first approach to placemaking. And also joining us is Chris Koster, a knowledgeable coastal project engineer, contract manager, and project manager working for Coastal Partners. Chris is highly experienced and working towards chartership with the Institution of Civil Engineers, specializes in project management, site supervision, contract management, and detailed design, construction methods, buildability, health and safety, risk management, procurement, public liaison, and environmental best practice in marine construction. So I'm going to welcome you both to the stage, Sophie and Chris. And I am really excited to hear more about this project. As I said, we covered it in the magazine, and it's one of my real favorites. So I look forward to our discussion after your talk.
Thanks, Christine. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today and having this opportunity to share really a journey of about 15 years, actually, working on the South Sea Coastal Scheme in Portsmouth. So Chris and I are going to be talking about a number of things about maximising value from flood infrastructure projects, and in particular developing place solutions to engineering problems and some reflections and lessons learned we've got along the way. And this first photograph is a photograph that was taken a few years back on South Sea seafront in Portsmouth. I think it's a familiar picture for many seaside towns and cities, and indeed actually across the country, where we see streets turn into rivers, or a shopkeeper even wading through their destroyed shop front. And I think the sea often reminds us, sometimes violently, of its immense power. And as we all know, as climate change accelerates, we're now starting to enter an era, I think, where extreme storms that were once probably a rare or more unusual event are now becoming routine. And communities are very much on the front line of flooding and coastal erosion. And there's a report that was produced last month at the start of the year by the Environment Agency, which I encourage you to read because it talks about climate changes and future predicted sort of flooding. And they think that around 8 million properties, and that's homes and businesses, in England are now in areas at risk of flooding. And that's not only from the sea, that's also from rivers or surface water. And that's an astounding 1 in 4 properties by mid-century that are going to be vulnerable to this risk. So this not only represents huge economic implications, devastating effects on people's livelihoods, but I think there's also, and something that doesn't often get represented, is huge intangible impacts on communities. Such as mental health impacts, and just actually living with this fear is hugely overwhelming for a lot of people. And in response, the UK government has pledged a lot of funding in this area. Again, this year, they've confirmed a commitment to 2.65 billion spent to protect something like the 52,000 properties by March next year, and huge investment moving forwards. But I think it starts to beg the question around how this money is spent. And obviously there's the essential infrastructure around protecting people's homes, but also how is it money spent to leave a wider benefits, especially where you've got hold the line solutions, where there isn't a lot of room, and you've got urban and the sea in very, very close proximity.
So just to give some context really of Portsmouth and the scheme that I'm delivering down here with all the team supported. As you can see, Portsmouth, for those that don't know, right here on the south coast of England, pretty much that bang in the middle. And Portsmouth, the city, actually sits on Portsea Island. So you can see from this aerial photograph, it is a city hugely densely populated, now the third most densely populated city in the UK, and completely surrounded by water, 360 degrees. So you've got open coast down on the south side of the island where we're working on, and you can see the highlighted area of where the previous photo was taken, that wave attack. You know, a really common vision in Portsmouth and coastlines alike. But what's really important, and just to focus on the point that Sophie made, is that this is a city and it's a community, and just how close that city operates to the sea is really important, because you've got the technical problem, the engineering problem of how do we keep the water out, but also, you know, you can see on that photo there, the only real green space within the city is down by the coast. And so it's that recognition of how do we support the community in their use of that seafront, which is really challenging. And I did say it was a technical problem, and this is the crux of it. Sea level is rising, but you know, and we have incorporated that into all of our design. But the problem is real today. Here on the screen, you've got the flood impact of a 1 in 200 year event, present day, and you can see that the actual spread of that flood water from a single breach along that coastline is phenomenal, with over 10,000 individual properties actually being impacted and directly inundated with flooded with seawater. You know, that's 10,000 individual livelihoods impacted by that one storm event. That doesn't look at the additional surface water flooding that might come with a storm event. That doesn't look at additional, you know, surface service failures that might be associated with an event. That is pure coastal water inundation. And of note, in the heart of that flood map, there's some purple, and they're actually floodwaters of over 4 meters in depth. So a really substantial risk to such a lot of people down here on the coast.
So I think looking at that map, it's perhaps not, you know, surprising that investment into coastal communities is often very much welcome. Individuals with lived experience of floods welcome that reassurance of protection. But I think it's also worth noting that also there's people that have huge concerns around kind of what this kind of level of infrastructure might mean, around the fear of change, the loss of feel of coastal towns. They're hugely cherished, not only by people that live there, but obviously people who've been visiting these towns and cities for years. And also the worry that whoever's coming to design and build them, they're corporate organisations who just don't value people's communities' opinions and don't understand what makes the place special. And you can see that image to the left kind of sort of starts to show the point here. And this was back in 2010, the business case for funding for new coastal defences was developed for Southsea. I think the community recognised they needed defences, but I think because place-based solutions and approaches aren't perhaps the norm, there was very much nervousness around what might get delivered. So that image actually shows a one-to-one mock-up of sections of a new sea wall created by a local person using cardboard. And this was taken down to the seafront as part of a campaign to try and, you know, provoke reaction and get people kind of thinking about the implications of this. Without sounding too defensive, that wasn't actually an accurate kind of representation of what was intended to be delivered. But actually it was taken from an optioneering report and which had to test different scenarios of what might actually be possible under different kind of technical requirements as part of an EA outline business case. But understandably, people were very concerned about loss of views, loss of beach access, heritage setting. And that's not an unusual position we find ourselves in. We're working on lots of different coastal projects of a similar nature across the country. The image to the right, moving further west down our coast to Paignton in Devon, this is a photograph that I took back in 2021. It shows a campaign flyer where the community had a Save Our Promenade campaign, and they kept referring to the Berlin Wall of Paignton, which was followed by quite a sort of ill-conceived planning application with a lot of technical drawings and a very engineer-led solution, but again, around optioneering, around technical requirements. And actually the local authority had the foresight in Torbay to think, actually, we need to pause this, we need to actually properly listen to the community. So actually we then started this project, the first task around listening, building trust with the community and stakeholders, and then co-developing solutions to get to a solution that people are now supporting and actually is going to be on site later this year. So I think they kind of tell a picture here around kind of, what, different places that people are coming from around lived experience and otherwise. I think it's also worth noting that flood defence grant and aid funding is very, very prescribed. Not surprising, there's strict rules around what the money can and cannot go on. But often that might exclude solutions that capture wider public realm or regeneration outcomes. So you often have to be quite creative. You might need to think about integrated solutions where walls integrate seating or opportunities for setback to reduce heights or maximising environmental opportunities, statutory access. Also, the Environment Agency funding, the POTS does not differentiate urban and rural settlements at the moment, which can create issues in terms of the level of need and actually what monies are going to go on to. So I'm going to hand back to Chris now, who's going to actually talk more in detail around the scheme at Southsea.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. And as you say, the way that flood defence grant and aid set up is a very technical solution to a very technical problem, and so we felt it was really important that we had to embed people and place into the solution generation to start with. So let me just introduce the Southsea Coastal Scheme to you. As I mentioned earlier, down here on the south coast of England, the Southsea Coastal Scheme is the UK's largest coastal defence scheme. We're currently operating on around £200 million worth of major infrastructure upgrades on a frontage that spans nearly 4.5 kilometres. The frontage is really varied, as you've seen from my earlier photograph. We've got open coast with lots of high energy wave attack. We've got elements that reach round up into the harbour. We've also got a large number of sort of varying characters along the seafront, whether it be historical elements or amenity beaches or Victorian piers, for example. There's a lot of different characteristics on the project. So we've split this frontage into 6 sub-frontages, labelled 1 to 6, left to right, and you can see on the screen. And that sort of represents the different design elements that we've had in each frontage, and also marries that up with the construction delivery packages. So touching back on sort of how we incorporated and recognised the importance of capturing people and place into is traditionally in the water infrastructure environment, very technically driven. We wanted to recreate our delivery model, and this slide here shows how we have taken quite common working practices like co-working and collaborative teams and really just melted that down into one team. So within our daily delivery team, right from the outset all the way through to delivery, we've got members from the funding body, the Environment Agency. We've got members from Portsmouth City Council, who are the client, Coastal Partners, the specialist delivery experts, with support from Royal Haskoning and LDA Design, both leading on the design element of the work. We brought in Atkin Yarlis and Wessex Archaeology as some specialists to support us, and we've got Volker Steven and Boskalis Westminster as our construction delivery partner. And what was important is that we melded this team of experts and specialists into sort of one co-located delivery team right from the beginning. And what that meant is that we had a really diverse team. You know, we didn't have sort of one element of lateral thinking that only delivered technical problems to technical solutions, and you know, and only thought about things in one dimension. It meant that we were actually able to incorporate how we worked with people and place and community right from the get-go. It wasn't an afterthought, it wasn't a bolt-on, it was integrated into our delivery and integrated into our design. And I'll touch upon that more, but as Sophie mentioned, our funding is really prescriptive, so we had to be really careful on what we delivered, and we had to solve the problem first. We had to stop that floodwater coming into the city, but it's really important to understand the community and how they use the space to make sure that that was reflected within the design as well. So you can see here, you know, a couple of elements of our consultation and community engagement. So within the team, we're actually in delivery phase at the minute. We've got 4 full-time communication engagement experts with us. But right from the beginning, we were keen to make sure that we consulted. And always first, it was driven by an understanding of use. And then that was followed up by identifying of key areas where certain uses could be grouped together. And that led us into the development of a master plan document that Sophie and her team helped shape.
Thanks, Chris. I'll just briefly touch on this. Yeah, I think what was significantly different about this project was actually thinking about the longer term vision and strategy for the whole seafront. So rather than just thinking about the sort of what's happening at the water's edge necessarily, the extracts you see here are from a seafront kind of public realm enhancements plan report, where we effectively looked at a whole range of ideas for improved walking and cycling connections, improved biodiversity, events, play, you name it, to come up with what was something like 52 ideas for Southsea. And they were then kind of categorized into short, long, medium and longer term delivery, ones that could actually be delivered within the kind of core project and ones that actually might need partnership funding, how we might try and go about getting that, which has been, you know, which is really challenging for these projects to try and attract and lever that additional funding, but also thinking about we're not making decisions now that preclude opportunities for the future. And also a key part of the early phase of work was really kind of getting under the skin of the place and spending time not only listening to community, but actually looking at place dialect. So, for example, to the east of the scheme where you've got Eastney Beach, you've got a very natural kind of shingle beach with lots of kind of, you know, amazing plants that naturally colonise over years and certain colour tones and textures for that. There's 3 scheduled ancient monuments, numerous historic structures. We've got kind of seaside kitsch. We've got Victoriana. So trying to come up with something that unifies the whole seafront, but also has subtle nods to actually kind of respect and celebrate very tangibly that kind of, you know, that dialect of place.
So this is the case study, and what I wanted to sort of show you today was how we actually put that into practice. Because looking at, you know, the strategic element, it's really easy to talk about and big up how, you know, an integrated team might work, and you know, engaging with people creates these strategy documents. But what I wanted to do now is sort of take you on a little bit of a deep dive into just one example of how a technical working team integrated with a team of visionaries actually solved a really complicated engineering problem. So here on the screen, we've got, oh, sorry, so if you just go back one more for me. Thank you. Here on the screen, we've got the seafront before we got our hands on it. In the center, you've got Henry VIII's Southsea Castle, obviously a really nationally important historic structure. And you can see just from the shape of the coastline, it's right down on the pinnacle of the island and is really exposed to wave attack. You've got beaches to the left and the right flanks, which show sort of a little bit lower attack. And then you can see the sea defenses there are much more hard structures, really indicating just the power of the waves and what we've needed to put in historically to protect the coastline there. The existing, the design that we initially proposed was really substantial, and you can see on the left-hand side of that technical drawing is a small promenade with some people. and then a really large rock revetment, and that's supported by that horizontal line there. So that is actually a 30-meter deep sheet pile wall lasting 500 meters width, essentially buried into the sea as part of that rock revetment. And that structure was to prevent a slip circle that would essentially, as soon as we got into construction and placed all of the rock, that load on top would have created a slip circle. So all of it would have collapsed seaward. We'd also have had to have built that wall in the sea with terrestrial marine plant, and we estimate, a really substantial cost to the project at the time at a very constrained budget. So this is a problem. We really weren't able to build this solution. It was pretty extreme solution to have to put in for a flood defense project. And so we took that problem back to our integrated delivery team, and we were able to create this split level prom that you'll see on the screen now. Now this is an absolute jewel in the crown of Southsea. It is a really fantastic space that not only pays compliment to the city, but has really created a huge space for people to be able to use. And the solution was entirely driven by Sophie's team. So the driver was actually to reduce the load on that promenade, meaning that the rock and the prom could be slightly lower, and that essentially reduced the weight, which meant that the slip circle wouldn't occur, and that 30-meter long, 30-meter deep wall wouldn't have to have been built. Not only by doing that, we were able to split that level. We were able to introduce some really sympathetic seating with beautiful views over the Solent, as well as saving about 10% of the overall scheme's budget just through this solution. So just to really sort of bring that home, you can see, top left and right was the original solution, a very narrow promenade, not lit. You are, in fact, in the pinch point, it's only 1.2 meters wide, which is the absolute bare minimum of a public footpath. And you can see that we've really opened that space and followed the contour of the castle, paying homage to the castle itself and then introducing a place to stop and appreciate the space that you're in, both in the historic setting and in the Solent, rather than it just being a busy thoroughfare that you'd pass through and get a bit wet when the waves came up.
And this image here, as we sort of move down a bit more eye level, it's a photograph I took several years ago, and you can see the sort of, you can keep an eye on the railings to the left of this image, and this is the existing walkway. And if you look now at the railings to the left, you can see kind of what's been gained. And I spent some time last summer sort of walking on the prom, just chatting to people who are using it. And the image here is a mother and a daughter who live locally, who now talk to me about coming down here every Friday with a stereo and having these kind of dance and jam sessions. And I think, that's testimony to creating this kind of what we call this social canvas, opportunities for lots and lots of different people to come together. And again, these were some skateboarders from Portsmouth University that actually come down now to the seafront in areas that have actually been designated as kind of skateboarder friendly, where actually we're proactively encouraging that. And actually there's an area that Chris will talk about later where we're doing that more. And if we move further west from that image, again, this is another before photograph. And this is what you see here now. And we've also tried to create some sort of niches of sort of habitats here where we're reclaiming some of the existing stones. There's actually a kind of art and sort of discovery trail hidden within those stones. That protected rope kind of to protect the fencing is going to go, and children are going to be encouraged to play in here. But actually planting within a kind of shingle where we're actually mimicking some of the habitats you find on the beach. So there's some of the sea kale, sea cabbage, yellowhorn poppy, but also using that mix of native plants, but also other plants that encourage kind of, pollinators to come here and have a longer sort of flowering season, like the verbena. And again, this is, I chatted to the couple here. They were sat having, brought their bottle of wine down to have their kind of lunch on the seafront. And the gentleman to the right came and sat next to them. And through chatting, they actually realised they were living on the same street, but had never met before, and actually exchanged numbers. And, and it's really the power of how you create these different spaces for kind of activity, for play, social interaction. Again, people on the swing seat, again, the two ladies hadn't met the girl to the left and they began chatting. And lighting has also been a really key part, and we work with Studio Fractal looking at how you create a really safe, welcoming kind of route along the seafront, but also you protect the marine life and you have that in a kind of quite a localized, directed way.
And I'm pleased to say that these interventions are not a one-off. We've looked to create a design theme that joins the whole seafront up. 4.5 kilometers of our existing seafront wouldn't necessarily had that master plan that linked themes for the entire journey. So this is another element, Speaker's Corner. You can see a fairly wide open prom, continuous access to the beach, which is really important to our community, but with the odd bench, reasonably poor lighting. And this is what we envisaged. We've actually raised, or will be raising, this area up by nearly 1 meter higher. And something that was really important from our community was that, yes, we provided a flood defense, but we still kept the same feel and the same use of space, and then look to enhance that where possible rather than changing it and replacing it. So this is something that we've looked to do, and hopefully you'll see here in some of these photos that we've actually recreated almost exactly what we visualized. You can see although the trees are yet to get a little bit bigger, but we've got that space, and we've got some incidental play, a new accessible ramp, introduction of trees on a seafront that typically haven't had them before, lots more seating, and as part of the works, we've not only reinstated and refurbished these 3 grade 2 listed shelters, we've actually moved them more centrally onto the promenade to allow them to sort of be a focal point rather than just passed by. And this, and you can see how much level we've actually come up there with the 4 steps behind that skateboarder. So the sea defense level is managed there. And as Sophie mentioned right at the start of our meeting, we've been clever on how we've had to sort of integrate social importance into our engineering design. We've put a new shelter there. In fact, this is the area that we've actually made skateboarder friendly, with sort of coping rails and no skate studs and a nice flat surface. And we've also introduced these windbreaks under the shelter, which we rotate through local artists on a quarterly basis. And what I really like about this photo is sort of the juxtaposition between sort of a young, quite extreme skateboarder and maybe sort of some art for a different demographic there as well, all operating within the same space.
Thanks, Chris. And just finally, I'm just going to touch on what's next, and then we'll open up to some questions and a chat with Christine. So this is the next space, which is Poised for Change. And this is sort of moving slightly further west. You can see the Naval War Memorial at the centre of that image. And again, a mixture of different kind of flood defences. It's all quite degraded in the promenade likewise, and very much a place to move through rather than spend time. And what we're creating here is the new flood defence has created the first new public space in Portsmouth for many, many years. Again, celebrating the relationship with the sea. You come here to see the sunsets, but the public space is really intended to be a flexible space for events. And actually, the Southsea Common is used a lot for events. You saw from that previous image, perhaps in the distance, you could see some of the tents that were up, but actually it lacks a kind of hard, flexible space, and also opportunity for concessions to come in here to also create some revenue opportunities. And the setback wall of the flooding, which is an integral part of the flooding, we've tried to reduce the visual impact by terracing this and introducing, kind of again, planting, terrace seating and ramps here. So again, a really integrated approach. And this is our final slide, and I think I'll leave it with Chris from Coastal Partners to kind of, as a few key takeaways before I think we should spend time getting on to the questions.
Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, I got asked, what would be my lesson from a scheme like this, and I started off with quite a project managery answer, which was, it's really important to make sure you've got your vision and your master plan, and you scope it all out and deliver to that. But actually, I think as the project's grown and we've delivered, I think I've probably softened on that approach a lot more. And I think, yes, that is a really important starting point to get everyone onto the same page. And that has been the absolute backbone of our integrated delivery team, that we have a shared vision and a shared goal and a shared outcome. But actually, more importantly, is that we've been really flexible and adaptable. And we've continued to challenge ourselves of what more can we do to deliver place and social use within a really technical engineering project. The budget, as we mentioned before, is highly constrained. We don't have an additional funding for regeneration, for public realm, for placemaking. So everything that we've done has been driven through the creation of efficiencies, delivering it more streamlined, delivering it more effectively. And so the efficiencies through those designs and through construction, and having everyone within our integrated delivery team knowing that if we can just streamline things a little bit further, we can actually start to use that money freed up and reinvest back into place and public realm. And so for me, that has been such a key takeaway, that an integrated delivery team that's continues to challenge each other, continues to respect each other's specialities, and all drive forward for a common goal and vision is, it's really made this project.
So I'm just joining you here because I know we're going to turn to questions now, but I wanted to start by, first of all, congratulations on this project. I find it really inspiring the way that it does more. As you said, continue to challenge ourselves to how we can, deliver more for the people. There's even this moment where you discuss an area of the promenade that is skateboarder friendly, something that we're not used to hearing in these places to gather. And this is a real pro-social project. I wondered whether there were any concerns about antisocial behavior, and whether there was a tension between, we're going to create this place, we're going to invite people to come and gather here. Was there any opposition to that? Because I know that is something that comes up in other areas and in other places.
Certainly, within the design, you know that you can challenge that by making it a nicer area, but also supporting. We've got lighting in places we never used to have lighting now. We've got much wider promenades, and all of that builds a space where people are more comfortable being. And so that does sort of start to rule out space for anti-social behavior to hide in. But that's not to say that we haven't had vandalism. It is frustrating to see your hard work be picked apart and be destroyed, but the maintenance element has been designed in from the beginning as well. We've tried to balance the use of hard structures that are much more vandal proof with sort of actual nice materials, wood and timber and planting that can be vandalized. And we just know that there is going to have to be an element of work to maintain what that looks like and maintain that standard a little bit.
Sophie, do you want to add to that in terms of, did you have to win any hearts and minds around those pro-social places?
Yeah, and I think you raise a really good point here. And I think often when you're in a much closer proximity of some residential, in particular, where you've got that, I think there's often nervousness, and there is on any project creating social spaces. People get very, very nervous around that. And I think obviously design goes so far, doesn't it? We try and encourage an active natural surveillance, create more of a kind of, bring in, I think, uses. And I think this is where the vision long-term is going to come in here around, wouldn't it be great to have more kiosks that are open later into the evening so people come down there? So you've got more eyes to make people feel safer. I think is going to be really important. And I think we've got there's better examples to share now of what's worked elsewhere, but I think it is that kind of age-old, if somewhere looks cared for, often there is often less vandalism. And I think, let's not pretend here, these environments are some of the most challenging environments to build in and actually keep the things looking good, actually. And there's lots and lots of kind of, you need to think really carefully about the specification of everything. Try and avoid sort of painted surfaces that need recoating. Try and let materials weather naturally, really robust section sizes and that sort of thing. So, but I think having the community actually now feeling like they've got a sense of ownership, and how you get that sense of ownership, it's their scheme, not our scheme, I think is also part of that kind of, that solution. So yeah, it's something we have to think quite carefully about.
In both of the anecdotes that you talked about, I mean, and this is a place-based solution to an engineering problem, but in both those scenarios, the engineering proposal had to come first, I imagine, to secure the funding or to kind of unlock the kind of vision for what needed to be done, or the set the benchmark. Is there any way around that, or is it always going to be starting with a submission for a wall and then working backwards to bring in the place setting or the place ambition?
I think that to an extent, there's only so many coastal structures that will do the job. And so as part of our journey, we did long list out essentially every coastal structure that you could put in that area, and quite evidently 95% of them were going to have to be disregarded, either through cost, through buildability, through actual suitability, and that's why actually engaging with the community on how they use that space right from the outset was so important, because that did guide what engineering solutions were suitable. In the cases where there was only one really real solution that we could put in place, the focus was then on what could we do behind it to make sure that that interaction was positive. But in other cases, if there was 2 or 3 engineering solutions that were suitable, we could really look at how it complemented how the space was used, and it was that consultation process that was really vital right at the beginning. One of the, I think I mentioned it earlier, but one of the key pieces of feedback from our consultation was that a lot of people liked using the space how it was, and actually that was quite freeing, because what it meant was that we didn't have to rethink about whole new seafront alignments. We could really just focus on enhancing those existing spaces and allowing sort of the bones of the engineering structure to sort of be covered up by those interventions. So by having the engagement early on, and again having that integrated delivery team, it meant that the placemaking and the engineering could go hand in hand right from the beginning, rather than having to butt one up against the other.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Chris. But I think as well, these schemes, the nature of what you're trying to do here is so prohibitively expensive in terms of your question around, is there are there other ways of trying to secure this? Yes, there are. You could effectively have a large, building plot and say to a developer, you come and build here, and in exchange, you need to be building, a hell of a lot of coastal defence here. And that does happen. But the scale and magnitude of built development you would need to be able to achieve that to get the right returns, I think would be hugely challenging, which is why often it doesn't happen. And you need to look at it as a much larger area because of the way kind of, the coastal dynamics work. So you can't just prepare a small area, or you can, but actually you need to look at it in its totality. So, and I think for Southsea, it was really challenging because actually there were certain operators here, for example, on the pier, that actually hadn't invested in kind of improving what they got for years, because they actually felt like, well, what's the point? Because we don't know what's going to happen in terms of protecting our asset. So, but that's not to say there aren't smaller things that can happen in terms of other schemes, and and often we have had projects where we've done a sort of seafront master planning project, and then there's been smaller scale interventions or creating kind of tidal mud flats and other areas and things like that around nature-based solutions. But I think in an urban environment, it's really, really challenging.
There's a couple questions here I'd like to pick up. One from Jacqueline Yu, who's an architectural designer at Broadway Malyon. As someone who's not involved in governing these projects, I find engaging in initiatives like the one presented today challenging. How can we contribute to infrastructure projects and help drive such initiatives on a personal level?
Wow, that's a good question. That is a really good question, because I suppose building, I would welcome, more designers to get involved in this sphere. I think there's lots more projects that actually would benefit from an integrated solution. I think building relationships with coastal authorities, with engineering teams, but given it is quite a specialist area of work, actually, let's not kid ourselves here. You actually do need, the success is you've got landscape architects and designers being able to talk the technical language of flood defence and understanding those technical requirements without proposing really naive solutions. But you also need enlightened engineers that are also going to be able to talk and understand about kind of design and actually, why a community might not want, and I think most engineers understand this, a really tall concrete wall that could become a kind of focus for graffiti. And also procurement around this is kind of, there's certain avenues of procurement through Environment Agency, through certain frameworks. And I think it's around building relationships, it's around capitalising on basically kind of opportunities, really. And just finding out what's going on. And hopefully events like this will start to raise awareness. There's also not enough landscape architects working in the Environment Agency. So if anyone in the Environment Agency is on this call now, I think, they would share that view. There's a huge resource and skills shortage. So, there's lots of layers to this.
And it sounds like, again, we're going back to this integrated team, get a team together of experts, and so that there is a bunch of perspectives around the table, which dovetails with what Holly was saying on our last talk. Holly Bruce, who's from Glasgow City Council, she's saying, I've got to get the heritage people around the table. I've got to get the landscape people around the table. I've got to get the nature people around the table, and I think you were saying that too. That was the strength in the decision making, is getting everyone on board and aligned and getting the best outcome from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And obviously, the likes of Historic England and the statutory bodies as well that are involved in this are a key part of this journey, because actually they need to be really comfortable with working with what's being proposed in such sensitive historic, and that goes against everything. So yeah, it all, a lot of this comes back to joint working and a much improved kind of communication, along with kind of, technical understanding, I think.
So there's a question from Esther Morrison, who's director at Paprika, and she mentions that lighting is so key. Even small towns in Spain seem to pay more attention to the lighting of alleys and tunnels than we generally see in UK cities. Why? So what happens around lighting? I mean, I've heard of these tussles before, and on canal towpaths, the kind of famous arguments between bats and people. Sophie, is that something that you encounter? Is lighting difficult?
It doesn't need to be. I think it can actually be quite straightforward. Bring in some really good lighting designers and others and professionals around the table, and you can get the right solutions. I think there are some huge issues about funding sometimes for these schemes, and actually, kind of, again, it comes back to making that funding work harder. There's also massive issues around these contracts that the councils sign up to with providers that maintain the asset of lighting, because actually often that might be around a certain kind of type of lighting that's very functional, which is great at one level, but actually it might not be that warm, welcoming lighting that lights the face and engenders feeling of security or feature lighting. And if you try and do anything different from that contract, it basically means a lot of negotiation with these contractors, and they are going to demand more money because they're saying it requires more to effectively maintain those. And these are contracts that have been in place for a long time. So, and I think there is a challenge, it's a huge challenge around these projects, around getting funding, in terms of partnership funding. And I think Chris and I would both agree that, you know, we could have probably even done more on Southsea. We'd love to have kind of done more around, you know, play and biodiversity around on the Southsea Commons stuff. And this is part of a longer term journey. But actually getting partnership funding is really challenging, especially when it might perceive the project's got already a big pot. And there's a slight naivety around actually how far that pot can be spread. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I was actually going to make that point with the earlier question as well, is that I love the optimism and I love having as many people around the table and looking for as many win-wins as we can. But ultimately, you know, we've got huge funding constraints. You know, we've got to essentially build a brand new city seafront for less than, you know, a footballer's wages. It's a really challenging piece, and you know there is always going to be winners and losers and conflicting drivers, and on top of that we're constrained about how we spend that money. Like I mentioned, it is technical money for a technical problem, and so everything that you know Sophie and I have managed to include within this project is a bonus. You know, we've worked so hard to ensure that we've cut the cloth to fit so that we can deliver the things that probably a lot of other industries would consider, you know, core pieces. But we, you know, we've worked so hard to make sure that they are embedded and they are included from the get-go, because we believe it's the right thing to do. But you do have to draw the line on something, and you know you can't deliver everything.
And I think this is the looking for the win-wins, this kind of making the money go further. Are there, do you feel, or are you starting to hear from people who see this project and think, right, I've got my environment agency funding, I've got the flood resilience project, and this is the approach I want to go? Are people moving in this direction, or is this, you know, is that a hope for you? Is that they see this and think, how can I deliver more?
In my mind, this should be considered the gold standard for infrastructure delivery or water infrastructure delivery. And Sophie and I speak about, you know, the water industry possibly being a little bit more archaic. And there is pressure, like I mentioned, that funding pressure is huge, and it's so easy to cut out anything non-technical for delivery. But I do see this as gold standard for delivery, and I would, you know, I'd love to talk to you all day about, you know, the nuances of an integrated delivery team and the benefits. It certainly doesn't come without its costs, and it is a major infrastructure project backed by HM government. And, you know, I know that although it is scalable, it's not always going to be appropriate for a, you know, a £2 million project, a £500,000 project delivered by you know, a local community or a local government. So, but if there's lessons that we can share and support, then, you know, I think it is worthwhile exploring.
I have a question from Carolyn Bowman, who's a social value consultant at Useful Projects in London. And she asked, did you formalize collaboration into the project's governance processes to enable that integrated delivery team? And if so, how?
Yeah, good question. So, you know, so the client is Portsmouth City Council, you know, and that is an organisation that is used to having feedback from their community into what they shape and deliver. So, all of those consultation questions and questionnaires were designed in partnership with the city as a client. You know, and they have a wealth of experience in managing the seafront, and, you know, already have a really good outreach with a lot of user groups, and so it was quite easy to capture all of that and bring it back into our you know, into our design gateways and interact with the different council departments on usage of areas and, you know, feedback on that. So yeah, it definitely did shape that decision making process pretty heavily.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris. It's been evident. I think also when this was procured, and I think back quite a few years now, when we bid for this initially as through a framework, it was very, very deliberate in that brief. It talked a lot about integrated working, about the governance of the project, and actually as a team we had to work really hard to actually come up with ways that we were going to be working that were actually going to be different, how we were going to share experience from elsewhere, how we were going to come together and not just say we were going to be coming together, actually coming together deliberately, not only online, but also in person. And that has continued across the project for a very, very long time. So there was definitely the answer to the question right from the outset in that brief that went out was actually about a way of working and a philosophical approach to this project.
Well, I'm sad to say that's our time for this session, but that was a brilliant story to share and a really inspiring look at how flood resilience can deliver above and beyond. I know there'll be many people wanting to share this case study with their colleagues and friends to talk about how it is possible to take one thing and make it deliver so much more. So thank you both for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And that concludes this session, but we will be back in 10 minutes on the hour with Catherine Manning, who is Head of Impact Practice at Impact Reporting, who will be looking into the imperfect art of impact measurement. We're looking right into the heart of social impact measuring and social value measurement, and that's on the hour. See you then.